Hey, what's up, dudes? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another Dead by Daylight video. Today we're going to be talking about Fear Street. Now, Fear Street has become very popular in the horror community within the past few months since Netflix did the Fear Street trilogy on their platform. Fear Street before that, I think it was known, but it wasn't as known as R.L. Stine's other work, Goosebumps. But since the Netflix trilogy, I've seen so much hype and support around this franchise and around this series, especially for people wanting it in Dead by Daylight. But is that possible? Well, we're going to do our best to answer that question on whether it could actually come to Dead by Daylight or not, and who the killer would be. We're going to be basing our criteria on community popularity for the series, franchise popularity for the IP itself, dev support within Dead by Daylight, have the devs talked about it, do the devs want it, and whether it's been previously teased or not within the Dead by Daylight community by the devs. Before we completely jump into it, I would like to ask you guys, if you are updated, informed, or entertained, please consider leaving a like on the video. It does a ton for visibility on the video, and it means a lot to me. And if you want more Dead by Daylight content like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It means a ton to me, and we're getting really close to 20,000 subscribers, which is actually insane. But with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. So let's start with franchise popularity. How popular is this franchise? Well, of course, if you guys did not know, Fear Street was created by R.L. Stine in 1989. So with it being by the author of the Goosebumps, it already by association has a ton of popularity and support behind it. And that actually led to the Fear Street trilogy from Netflix happening. But in 2019, it was originally going to be by 20th Century Fox and Chernin Entertainment. But in April of 2020, it was announced that Chernin Entertainment ended their distribution deal with 20th Century Fox, and they ended up making a multi-year first look deal with Netflix, and that's how we got the Fear Street trilogy that has become so popular. Now, what about community support within Dead by Daylight? How popular is this within Dead by Daylight? Well, it's actually more popular than I expected. I've seen the popularity surrounding this franchise in the Dead by Daylight community. There's a lot of people that actually love this, and it's more than likely because it's horror. We're a very, of course, horror-based community, so anything horror that comes out that is really good, like Fear Street, we're automatically going to gravitate to that. So there is a ton of support behind this franchise in the Dead by Daylight community. Granted, not as much as a character like Hellraiser or a character like Springtrap or a character like Jason, but there's still a ton of support here. What about dev support though? Do the devs want this chapter? Have the devs talked about it on anything? No, unfortunately the devs have not talked about this yet. Fear Street is relatively new. It did just come out in July, and there are probably a ton of other things that the devs are already working on and have been working on. So I'd say we probably wouldn't see a Fear Street chapter until next year, or maybe even the year after. And more than likely, we wouldn't hear them start talking about it or even mentioning Fear Street until next year, middle of next year. And of course, where it's still relatively new, it's not that cult classic like Friday the 13th or Hellraiser or Chucky, so not a lot of people already are asking about it. And usually, most of the time, the way that these licenses get mentioned is by people asking about them. And I'd say while Fear Street's definitely popular, of course it's on Netflix and, you know, millions of people have seen it, the people in this community right now are kind of like, not, I don't want to say a small minority, because there's definitely a lot of them, but there's definitely more people out there in Q&As asking about Jason, or asking about Chucky, or asking about Jeepers Creepers, or Slenderman, or Springtrap. So I'd say Fear Street probably hasn't gotten the chance to shine as far as Q&As go yet, because that is the main way we see devs talk about these characters and their opinions on them. Now, whether they've been teased or not yet, previously teased, that's an easy one. They have not. But there's another interesting point when it comes to all this, and I'm sure you guys have already drawn the connection and have been waiting on me to say something about it, and that is Netflix, Stranger Things, Dead by Daylight and Stranger Things. Why would they go ahead and start up another partnership on another IP after it seems like Netflix just ripped Stranger Things away from them and we're going to be losing all of that content? Well, that's actually a pretty easy question to answer. See, Stranger Things is an original IP from Netflix. It's not something that someone else wrote. It's not something that's been around since the 80s. So that is a completely different entity in itself. So we can't really compare the two on that playing field. And the thing you have to think about is the fact that Stranger Things is a very video game accessible franchise. Like I say, I'm not saying Fear Street isn't, but Netflix would definitely, if they're starting out making video games, would definitely want to get a Stranger Things video game out as fast as freaking possible. Because Stranger Things, the video game, will sell like hotcakes. I mean, Dead by Daylight Stranger Things chapter sold like hotcakes. So of course Netflix is going to want to do that as fast as they possibly can. Fear Street, on the other hand, is an R.L. Stine. It's written by R.L. Stine. It's not a Netflix-specific IP. Netflix just has a deal to make the movies. They had a deal to make the trilogy. And where Dead by Daylight, Behavior, and Netflix have all worked together in the past, I don't see it being that hard on this IP that's separate from Netflix, separate from an original Netflix IP. I don't see it being that hard for them to work together on something. And of course, I haven't really talked about a specific character coming to the game or anything because there's so many. Personally, I would probably go with the Camp Nightwing killer. That's just my opinion. Tommy Slater, because he's kind of a Jason copycat. And the only reason I want them to do, I feel like they would do a Jason copycat in Dead by Daylight, is because at this point, it's so unlikely to see Jason in Dead by Daylight. I'd say Jason is extremely likely if the lawsuit ends, but if the lawsuit doesn't end for the next 10 years, then that's just us never getting Jason, which means Tommy Slater, a Jason ripoff, is probably the next best choice because, I mean, he literally is Baghead Jason, it feels like. But like I said, there's so many characters in Fear Street that they could do. You got the Milkman, you got the Grifter, you got the Skull Face, the Skull Mask, whatever you would call him. I mean, so there's plenty of killers that they could pick from. Hell, they could maybe do a crazy chapter with multiple killers and multiple survivors. And another really cool thing is that Maya Hawke and Sadie Sink are also in Fear Street. They also play characters in Stranger Things too, so they could be in the Fear Street chapter after the Stranger Things chapter goes, and we could kind of have like a spiritual successor to the Stranger Things chapter, which I think would be really cool as well. But overall, I do think this is a very likely chapter for Dead by Daylight. While Fear Street is not new and it's been around since like '89, I'd say the popularity really skyrocketed with this Fear Street trilogy by Netflix, and it's going to become a cult classic horror icon. In my opinion, in 30 years, we're going to probably look at Fear Street as something like Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street. It's going to be this generation's version of that, and I'm okay with that because it's actually pretty damn good. So I definitely wouldn't mind to see one or more of these killers and survivors come to Dead by Daylight. I'd be very interested to see who they did from the series and what they would do with them in the game. But I want you guys to let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. I'm very interested to hear what you guys have to say. Which killers and survivors would you go with? But that's going to do it for me, dudes. Thank you guys so much for watching. I've been your host. My name is Tooten, and I'll see you dudes next time. Peace out.